Hi everyone, if you guys can hear me outside, if we could start making our way inside, please. Thank you. We've got a few people still coming in, but we're going to get a start. So to those of you who are here this evening to our biannual general meeting, I want to welcome you. It's good to have you here. It's great that you could make time out in the week to come and hear about important things and to celebrate what God has done. And in light of the theme of celebrating, I'd love to just read from Isaiah chapter 12, verse 4. And the context is how on that glorious day of the Lord, which we know so much about now, thanks to our series in Daniel, and there will be so much celebration and praise on that day. This is what Isaiah says. Give praise to the Lord, proclaim His name, make known among the nations what He has done. Give praise and proclaim that His name is exalted. Make known to the Lord, which is what we're going to do this evening. For He has done glorious things. Let this be known to all the world. Shout aloud and sing for joy, people of Zion, for great is the Holy One of Israel. Let this be known to all the world. And not just on that day will we give thanks to the Lord for the glorious things He's done, but as we look back over this year and we think about what God has done, and not just on that day will we give thanks, and for us as a church, isn't it true that there is so much to be grateful for? So much to not just on that day will we give thanks for sustaining us, for having His hand. Isn't it true that there is so much to be grateful for the growth that has happened in His kingdom as a result of Rosebank Union Church, for sustaining us, for His financial provision through difficult times, for the growth that has happened. We're grateful to the the Lord. So I'm going to ask you to stand. We're going to sing 10,000 reasons. There are more than 10,000 reasons. So I'm going to ask you to stand. So we're going to worship together. Sing 10,000 reasons. There are more than 10,000 reasons. I'm going to ask you to stand. So we're going to worship together. Sing 10,000 reasons. There are more than 10,000 reasons.
Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul. Let's worship His holy name. Oh my soul, sing like never before. Oh my soul, sing like never before. Your song again, whatever may pass and whatever lies before me. Let me be singing when the evening comes. Bless the Lord, oh my soul. Worship His holy name. Sing like never before. Oh my soul, I worship Your holy name. You're rich in love and You're slow to anger. Your name is great and Your heart is kind. For all Your goodness I will keep on singing. 10,000 reasons for my heart to find. So bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul. Worship His holy name. Sing like never before. Oh my soul, I worship Your holy name. And on that day when my strength is failing, the end draws near and my time has come. Still my soul will sing Your praise unending. 10,000 years and then forevermore, forevermore. Bless the Lord, oh my soul. Sovereign in the mountain air, sovereign on the ocean floor, with me in the calm, with me in the storm, sovereign in my greatest joy, sovereign in my deepest cry, with me in the dark, with me at the dawn. In your everlasting arms, all the pieces of my life, from beginning to the end, I can trust you. And in your never failing love, you work everything for good. God, whatever comes my way, I will trust you. Sovereign in the mountain air, sovereign on the ocean floor, with me in the calm, with me in the storm, sovereign in my greatest joy, sovereign in my deepest cry, with me in the dark, you are with me at the dawn. And in your everlasting arms, all the pieces of my life, from beginning to the end, I can trust you, Lord. In your never failing love, you work everything for good. And God, whatever comes my way, I will trust you. And God, whatever comes my way, I will trust you. And all my hopes, all I need, held in your hands. All my life, all of me, held in your hands. All my fears, all my dreams, held in your hands. All my hopes, all I need, held in your hands. All my life, all of me, held in your hands. All my fears and all my dreams, held in your hands. In your everlasting arms, all the pieces of my life, from beginning to the end, I can trust you. And in your never failing love, you work everything for good. God, whatever comes my way, I will trust you. God, whatever comes my way, I will trust you.
Just that line, that you work everything for good, Lord. Man, that gives me so much confidence whenever I think about what it means. Thank you that you indeed are so entirely sovereign over our lives. Some of us have had really tough years, and yet, God, you work everything for good for those who love you. Thank you for your sovereignty over this church. Over 100 years of ministry, God, and that is because of you. Apart from you, Lord, we labor in vain. Thank you for using this church in this city. Thank you for the lives that have been transformed through this church this year. And thank you that more is to come, because you are faithful. So as we start this meeting, God, we turn our attention to the matters of business, and we thank you for the people who will be presenting tonight and speaking through various things. And we pray that you would lead them and give us ears to hear and give us gracious hearts and give us clarity and wisdom, we pray. In Jesus' name. Amen. Let's take our seats together.
Well, good evening, everybody. I hope you have all enjoyed your dinner. Indaba said in his notices that he wouldn't miss it, and I noticed he seemed to be near the front of the queue, so I hope that was the case. Thanks, Dave and Kristen, for leading us in worship. It's a very special time as we just are able to just reflect on what we're actually about here this evening, Lord. I welcome you all, the members and visitors, to our biannual general meeting. Please ensure that you are checked in. You would have come into the foyers there. There would have been some elders, and thanks to those elders that had volunteered to do that, just to check you in. You should all have, if you're in the auditorium, you should all have a piece of paper that looks like this, and it's got 2 QR codes. Fun fact of the evening, what does QR stand for? Quick response, right? So we hope it is exactly that, a quick response. It was invented in 1994 by the Japanese and taken a few years for us to implement here at Rosebank, so that's fine. So that's the QR codes. If you're online, you will also be able to access those links through the online portal, and that'll be explained if you're looking at the online version. We have effectively three matters to be cleared this evening for members to vote on, and that will be explained afterwards. If you look at the agenda, the first thing we're going to do is basically just check that we actually can continue with this biennial general meeting. So I'm just going to ask Gareth, as the church secretary, just to confirm that we have a quorum. Thank you very much. Well done to all of you for attending. It's one of the things we seem to make a big deal of at the members class. Please come to the meetings, and I appreciate each and every one of you being here. Okay, so in case you're thinking that this QR code stuff looks like Maths Paper 2 in the matric exams, don't panic. There's also some manual voting slips if things really get out of hand. But before we carry on, I'd like to just hand over to Richard. You'll know that Richard joined us in March 2020. He had his induction service here, I think, on the 15th of March 2020. And the president promptly closed the church down and everything else down that night. So while we all went home to find the sail to raise, right, what we didn't realize is that we didn't even have a boat, right? So Richard's going to spend some time having had the opportunity to really get going, actually in his 3rd year of ministry at Rosebank, who'd believe it. He's going to do some reflection this evening, and we look forward to that a lot. Thank you, Richard.
Well, good evening, church. Thank you again from my side for coming out tonight. So this is a bit unusual for a biannual general meeting to have this sort of slot. So normally at our annual general meeting in March, that's when we kind of officially receive ministry reports from the year past. And so you remember we have fancy videos and things to reflect on the year past. But we thought that it would be appropriate this year. Firstly, we have a bit of space in the agenda this time around, but it's been a really significant year for us as well. And we thought that it would be appropriate to take some time before we get to the business matters to actually just reflect a little bit on the year that has passed, just while the year is fresh for us. So I'm going to do that. We're going to take some time for that this evening. So one of the reasons that this is a really significant year, I mean, Roy alluded to it, is it's the first year since I've been here, but the first year in a while where we've been able to run and do ministry at full capacity. So I think that's quite significant for us. So 2020, as Roy mentioned, with COVID-induced year for us, so we're 8 months, so we were just in studio church, and so that was weird, and we made it. And then last year, actually, though, 2021 was almost more disruptive because we spent a total of 5 months of last year also in studio, but we were in and out. Do you remember that? We were kind of at church, then back in studio, back at church, 100 people, 50 people, and it kind of was so disruptive for us last year. And so this year was kind of the first opportunity that we've had to just open the doors and run fully and kind of normally for a whole year. And we've done that plus some, been back at kind of full operational capacity. And I think that as we stand here today in November, that we can see the fruits of just being able to be consistent through the year. And I think for me, this has actually been one of my biggest learning points over the last few years, or probably more correct to say relearning points, just the value of consistency in ministry, like being able to be consistent and do ministry, like the value of that. With all the disruptions of the previous years has really compromised us. And so this year we got to run hard, and I think we've seen really good fruit from being able to do that. So we've seen signs of growth and health kind of in our next gen department for sure, from kids, youth, right through to young adults. I mean, even our 60 plus ministry was able to get back up and running this year as well. We've seen growth in the number of community groups at our church, the number of people being part of our community groups. We've admitted as new members this year, that's taken into account this class that's currently with us right now. So if that all goes according to plan, over 70 new members into our church this year, which in Darbo a while ago with the ministry staff kind of did a whole last 12 years since 2010 of new member information. And there's only been 2 other years where there's been a higher new member intake than this year. And so none of what we've seen in terms of growth, we would say, is explosive, but it's been just consistent, steady growth that really is the result, I believe, largely of consistency. So that's kind of been a key theme of mine this year. We've been able to be consistent and that we're seeing the fruits of that. Now, of course, what I'm predominantly involved in this church ministry-wise is the Sunday services. And so I wanted to take a little bit of time to kind of show you that as well, just kind of what we've seen. And you'll just see these themes coming up throughout my presentation tonight of just kind of steady rebuild, steady growth. And so I thought I would show you tonight, just as we reflect on Sunday services and kind of coming out of COVID and people coming back to church and all things, I thought I would show you a graph tonight. Yes? Just there's going to be graphs, there's going to be diagrams, there's no equations. Well, maybe I'll sneak one in. All right, so if you can just throw up that graph on the screen. I just want to show you what that's what you're looking at is kind of, so in the blue line there is kind of our, in-person attendance figures. That's just averages at the end of each quarter. So obviously we haven't finished the fourth quarter, so that's the blue line. Green is the kind of online, which is views. And back in the COVID times, pastors, when we first clicked into online only, we were all like a view, but how many people are behind each device? And there were even numbers for that back in the day. 2.37 was the worldwide. So anyway, this is just views, and we're not about ultimate numbers here, but trends really. And so that's what that green line shows, and then there's the black line as well. And so kind of you can see just on the blue period, it's interesting, you can see the winter kind of dip there. Just to note on the online views, the reason for fourth quarter being so low is there's quite a big lag between, so even I sent this picture to Jaime on Friday, and just today had a look again, and the numbers can change by like 10% already. So there's quite a lag between people kind of watching, and so that's why there's kind of the dip there. But basically, what I want to kind of highlight to you is that if you look at kind of actual figures of in-person attendance at this point now this year, we're about 100 people away from the average attendance fourth quarter at this same time pre-COVID. And I think that's just something church leaders are talking a lot about, is kind of the church going into COVID and largely getting decimated. And kind of now it's like, trying to kind of recover and rebuild again. And so we're not quite there, but close. But what's really interesting to note is that we as we've kind of built steadily in our in-person attendance over the year, at the same time, while we've seen people coming back to church, also it's been growing this kind of online ministry. And I suppose that's something that's just really worth us thinking about and just processing, and for you guys to take note of. Like, what does this mean? How are we kind of interpreting this data? And we don't spend all our time kind of looking at these data, but kind of what do you think this suggests to us? So I think, firstly, for me, it means there's still some work to do in terms of trying to shepherd people that would say they're part of Rosebank, but are maybe only watching online, and trying to invite them and shepherd them and lead them back to kind of the gathered congregation of worship and the community once again. And this has been really encouraging to me, kind of since I think we came out of winter a little bit. It was almost a run of a few months where every Sunday I was meeting people who were like, we've been at the church for 20, 30, 40 years, but we haven't been back to church since the start of COVID, and we're back, and we're so glad that we're back. I don't know if any of you have had that experience, but it's kind of been what we've been thinking a lot about this year. And for example, even our big Spring Sunday was just a hope to kind of, if people are going to just break that inertia and invite them back to church and get people back to church. So there's still some work to do on that sense in terms of really helping invite and lead people back to church. But I think what's encouraging is when you think about this new thing of this online audience, whatever form that is, when you think about that, that was something our church didn't have going into COVID, right? So that's something brand new for us. And as I've reflected on that and what does it mean for us as a church, I think what's been encouraging to me, and I don't have hard data for this, I think it would be impossible to get hard data, but what's been encouraging to me is I think the majority of people who are watching online, and it is a large amount of people, the majority of them are not part of Rosebank Union Church. So in fact, they are members of other churches in Joburg and around the country, but who are kind of basically supplementing their Christian faith by listening in to Rosebank Union, like we do. I think most of you as well would listen to podcasts and, and use that to kind of assist you in your Christian faith journey. And I don't have data for it, but there's a lot of anecdotal sort of evidence, if you like, for this. I mean, even just this past Sunday, 2 different people came to speak to me to speak about their family or relatives or friends in other parts of the country who attend their own churches but are just watching Rosebank each and every week, which is just a really interesting ministry that we now have. And from my side, that makes me really happy that we are able to do that we are able to kind of add to people's Christian faith journey, even though as a church, we won't ever see tangible benefits from that. These are people who will not tithe to our ministry, who will not serve in our ministry, but we're just happy that we are able to kind of bless the wider community of faith in our country and perhaps even around the world for that. And I think that's a good thing for Rosebank. So whatever else you want to take away from that, I think this church, and one of the reasons I almost came here, is, has this 115 years of heritage, of reputation in the community, at this strategic place in Joburg with these amazing resources, and that has to be used to bless the wider community of faith, right? That can't just be for the people who call Rosebank home. And so I think it's great that we have this ministry. And I'll tell you, there's a big motivator in my life, and we've spoken a lot about Christian motivation over the past few weeks, but I'll tell you, in my life personally, kind of a scripture that motivates me a lot is Luke chapter 12, where Jesus tells this interesting parable. But then it's kind of the bottom line is this, verse 48. He says, "From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded. And the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked." And so it's personally a big motivator for me, not in a negative way, but I know I've been given so much and am motivated to not waste it. And I think the same has to apply for Rosebank. And so kind of all that to say, to think about, Rosebank's unique in many ways, but one of the ways it is a large church. And with a large church comes large staff, large overhead costs. You'll hear more about that from Bruce later. And so, yeah, there are big costs associated with this kind of church, but it also affords us the opportunity, this kind of church, to do things that smaller churches can't do. And that doesn't make it better. It just means we have a different responsibility to use what we have. So, for example, we are able to start a Bible college in a township, kind of just all on our own, as a church. I mean, JBC are doing it, but we were the ones who were able to be able to drum up the support for that. It means we are able to house and sponsor a campus outreach ministry on the greatest university campus in the world, Wits University. We're able to house and adopt them into the ministry of our church, just things that you wouldn't be able to do. And yes, to have the equipment and human resources to provide just helpful content, insight, discipleship for Christians around the country. Now, to be sure, there are things that we lose in being a large church. We lose the ability to know the names of everyone who sits around us. Yes? I mean, even in this gathering, which is smaller, we wouldn't know the names of all the people around you. And I mean, even as a pastor, that's hard. Meeting people, I'm still like racking my brains for their names. We lose the ability for which in a smaller church, everyone is normally involved in some way and involved in the ins and outs of every decision in ministry, which is impossible in a larger church. However, I and we are not about to give up on the ideal of, even though we're a large church, to feel like an interconnected community of faith. And that leads me to the next thing I want to talk about tonight, and that is how we started the year sermon series-wise, which is gospel culture. So you just throw your minds back to the beginning of the year, where we did an 11-week series of basically what it was about is what kind of church we want to be. And if you think about it, if you remember, there were 10 culture codes. The first 5 of those 10 culture codes were all kind of pointing to the ideal or the dream or the hope or the pursuit of Rosebank, despite being big, actually feeling like and functioning like an interconnected family of faith. So, for example, mutual acceptance, warm acceptance, mutual correction, authentic vulnerability. These are things you wouldn't ordinarily see in a large church, but we want to see. Christ-like love, comprehensive forgiveness, etc. That's what we want to be like as a church. Now, on that note, part of this reflection segment is to talk about great things from the year, but also, like open areas or things maybe we would do differently. And we had great plans to, after the Gospel Culture series, kind of really roll that out in some way in terms of it actually becoming a culture of the church. And there were certain programs and events to enable us to do that, but we just couldn't fit it in when the busyness of the year carried on. But I'll tell you where this idea of gospel culture sits, because it has a resting place in one of our key kind of strategic documents as a church. That's right, it is the Nexus. You have to say it like that. So the Nexus, bring that side up for us. Just to remind you, I think you've been around this long enough, maybe new members not so much, but what this shows is kind of 3 ministry paradigms that we're trying to hold in focus and intention all at the same time. So the first one, right on the top, is an emphasis on discipleship and disciple making. And just by the way, this past weekend, Friday night, Saturday, a group of potential disciple makers led by Zwei and Caroline were getting together, just thinking of how to catalyze disciple making in our church. There's a lot more to be said about that, but that's what the top blue portion is about, is really how do we make disciples through the various ministries of the church. Then if you kind of look at the green part of that, that's this idea of the particular assignment being open to what God might be saying for a particular focus, a particular time, and that's what we call assignment Joburg. That's kind of just recognizing the role we have to play at Rosebank in impacting the great city of Joburg. More on that in a little bit, but it's that red part that we haven't yet kind of filled out. It's always been under the idea of values, so it speaks to of what we want to be like, not just what we do, but who we are becoming while we do what we do. And now that is a place that is going to be populated by gospel culture. So all that to say, watch this space for next year, where we really seriously do think through, now that we've learned, like how do we actually live that out in our community of faith. So while we're on the subject of the Nexus, let me just briefly touch on that Vector 3, the green one, which is our what we call assignment Joburg. And there are two new key ministries that we've invested a lot in as a church in order to use the resources we have to make an impact in certain areas of Joburg. I say two new ones because one of the other ones is, of course, Rays of Hope, and that existed way before this did, but that's, of course, a strategic outreach ministry for us. But the two new ones is our campus outreach ministry and Johannesburg Bible College. Now, in the next few weeks, the month of November, you'll be hearing more information on some of these partner ministries. But for now, I just want you to know this, that taking on board campus outreach and Johannesburg Bible College are two of the best decisions we've ever made as a church, ever. I mean, let's just talk campus outreach for a little bit. CO team, I think some of them might be here. The campus outreach team are lights out, some of the best ministers of the gospel you will ever meet, and they are on campus, this great campus of Wits University, and every day engaging students. And we love our campus outreach team. We love having them on our staff team now. We love having the students of the campus outreach ministry here with us on a Sunday night. If you come to Sunday evening services, you'll know when they're not there. And I have to share this quick story. I'm going to try not to take too much time, but it's such a great story for me that kind of highlights the importance of this campus outreach ministry. So the one Sunday night, I'm preaching, and afterwards we say, anyone wants prayer, come to the front. And so 3 young ladies come to see me at the front, and I know they're from the campus outreach ministry because they're all stood up there, and so they come and asking for prayer, ask what they would like, and so there's a couple of prayer requests, exams, pressures at home, things like that. And so I just, in striking up conversations, say to them, how long have you guys been Christian? And they look at me, all of them, and go, we're not Christian. Well, not yet. So we're exploring the idea, and that's why we're here, and, we like it here, and we want to find out more. Like, how amazing is that? How else would we as a church actually have interaction with non-Christian campus students apart from our ministry, like campus outreach? So you'll see when it comes to Bruce's budget presentation, so just a lot of this will make sense when Bruce speaks, that, there's ongoing financial support for this ministry, and you'll know now, at least, that is money well spent. So on to Johannesburg Bible College. I mean, sometimes we forget, guys, that only started this year. Hey, it launched it last year. The campus officially started running this year. Now, next Sunday, 27th of November, our Thanksgiving Sunday, our Thanksgiving offering is going that way, so just heads up on that. We'll have a lot more feedback from you. But I just have to tell you what an incredible story this is. So the college has seen double the expected students, the hoped-for students, double the number, to the point where they had to add an evening class. We only envisaged and only prepared for a morning class, but due to demand, have had to add an evening class, which was not originally part of the plan. So just note that. Double the expected number of students from Alex have attended JBC this year, and that number has continued. So when we were kind of starting this, Nat was telling me, I was asking him, what's the expected kind of, if you have 20 in the beginning, who comes through to the end? And it's anywhere from, 40% is good if you have 40% stay behind. I'm told major tertiary universities, it's anywhere from 60 to 85% dropout rate. Well, at the peak of students in the morning for JBC this year, we had 22 of them. There are now 18 of them. The 4 that have stepped down, like for good, one is because they've had a baby, the other one has got a job, so that's awesome. The other one has transferred to the evening class. So it's remarkable the number of students, and it's just crazy how quickly this campus grew roots and got traction. And I think it's just an amazing success story for us. I mean, it goes beyond our wildest dreams, and you'll hear a lot more of it from Nat and myself in 2 weeks' time, next Sunday. But for now, I think we just need to celebrate that. Yes? And that's possible due to, actually the church didn't provide any funding from budget. We are looking at doing that next year. I think we have to, but it's been able to do that through the generous support of patrons. And this is just to say we need patrons on board again next year. We have to raise the same amount that we looked at last year, so it's a 1.2 million amount, so please start thinking about that. Those that invested on the front end when we didn't know if it was going to work, thank you. But everybody now, coming on board now, know that it's an amazing use of your resources to put into this ministry. So, speaking of fundraising, let me move on and let's talk about another major item that came across our way this year, and that is Project Refresh. So Project Refresh, again, like I told you, the segment is about reflecting on highs, but also maybe things we would have done differently. And as I think about Project Refresh, there's maybe one thing that I wish we would have done differently. And so to highlight that for you, let me just take you back and tell you the origin story of Project Refresh, which we didn't do at the town hall meeting. So here's how it started. September last year, some of the staff, as well as Roy, who was our incoming EGB chairman, walked around this facility in order to get a holistic picture of all of the things that we need to do and potentially want to do as a church. And basically there were three categories of projects that came up. Firstly were big maintenance items that, normally we have a maintenance budget. We do maintenance every year, but because these were so big, they had been kicked down the road for many years because of the large number needed. And that's mostly things in this auditorium that you might remember, the chairs and the air unit, etc. So big maintenance projects was part of it. Then secondly were kind of smaller, definitely smaller, but upgrade projects that certain ministries felt that if we could do them, it would either cater for growth they had seen or potentially enable new growth, and that would be, for example, NextGen's plans to upgrade the Jerusalem Hall and some of the plans for the exchange. So that was the second category, necessary upgrades. And then the third category was maybe, if you like, we used the word enhancements. So these were far smaller amounts that would be a literal kind of refreshing of facilities like the entrance, etc. So we thought that instead of kind of a haphazard approach to this project and that project and come to the church here and there, let's consolidate all of the things that we know we're going to need to do and want to do over the next few years so that everybody knows all the things that we want to do and need to do. And so that's what we did, kind of compiled this major list, which consisted of the 5 projects within Project Refresh, so the auditorium, the Next Gen Jerusalem, and the exchange, the outside after-service gathering space, the entrance and outbuilding. So we have this exciting list. This is the end of last year. And we take the next step, get an architect to help us with design so that we can cost them, so that when we come to the church, we have a kind of accurate figure of what that would cost. And we get to this number, 12 million, which is a lot, to be sure. I need to tell you, it was originally 16 million, and we were determined to bring that down. So 12 million, it's a lot. However, as I mentioned at the town hall meeting last year, that is half of our annual operating expenses, which means it's not this way out, elaborate kind of crazy plan, but still a lot. Now remember, and this is, I think, a really important context for the members of this church, is that this is all starting last year, September, October, November, we're kind of wrapping this up. And last year, maybe you remember, at the end of the year, we finished the year financially as a church with a 2 million rand surplus. That seems like, lifetimes ago. But that's how we ended last year. So we're building this project. We have this 2 million rand surplus, and there's a surge of optimism. It's like, okay, if ever there was a time when we could finally stop postponing some of these things and just tackle it head on, like now's the time to do that. And so hence, coming into this year, there was great optimism about Project Refresh. But as the months start to go on in this year, we quickly realized, as you all realized, the economy shifted weirdly from a general optimism going into the year, and certainly the finances of the church changed dramatically, a lot. So we started immediately after the first quarter with a 1 million rand deficit. So we kind of had this 2 million rand surplus, and within 3 months, we've kind of burned through half of that. So now we're cutting projects that we'd already started, just maintenance stuff on the exchange, not even part of Refresh. So it ring-fenced amounts amidst this optimism, and we start cutting all of that. But the question is now do we still go ahead and do this thing? And so you're watching through the year, the finances start to stabilize, April, May, June. By no means did they ramp up, but at least the downward trajectory stopped, so it's stabilizing, the fall is halted, and so we decide that we're still going to do this, but we're just going to so we want to let the church know what we're thinking, but not push hard on this. And I think this is one of my main concerns for the year, is that when this finally happened, the town hall meeting, we were all in a pretty tough space. And so it was a big ask, and very different to how it was conceived of when this first kicked off. And so I just want to acknowledge that. So just acknowledge that and thank those who have been able to and who have given to Project Refresh. We absolutely needed it. We still do need it, but we know that it's going to be potentially a long journey going forward, longer than maybe we expected. But more than just kind of tempering my own or our own expectations around when this would happen, I think my biggest concern truly is that because of the timing of it and where our church was financially at the time, that it kind of muddied the waters in terms of what we actually needed from members. And what we actually needed from members was regular offering income. So I've mentioned this before, but it's now kind of firmly lodged and clear in my mind and our minds that the only way this can work in the future, that we don't get into a situation where we're in a 20-something-year-old building and haven't done critical maintenance. The only way it can work is if offering income equals operational expenses. There, I promised an equation. It's a really simple one. Offering income equals operational expenses, then any income that comes to the church through hiring out this facility, which is over R1 million a year, can go straight back into the maintenance and upgrade of this facilities. So that's the only way I think we can do this. That's going to take some time, and so for now, we still think it's important to have this kind of. I've really avoided using this word, but it's a members' meeting. You know, it's the wrong word, but in my mind from the beginning, it's almost like this special levy idea. We just have to catch up, get the facilities back up on track until such time as our offering income matches our operational expenses, and then we won't have to do these kinds of things. And believe me, that's not really top of my list of fun things as a pastor, is to be doing fundraising campaigns. But all that to say, just since I have the mic now, we'll hand over to Bruce in a moment. Just want to thank you, church, for your faithful giving from my side, from our side. We have seen, steady, consistent growth after we went down in the beginning of the year, and that same theme of ours of consistency and steady growth, and we want to thank you. This is something we don't do often enough, and to be honest, not sure how to do it. But for example, last Sunday, we had a volunteer celebration where we openly highlighted the work that volunteers do in serving the church, and it was awesome. But there are some people I know whose ministry is to giving, and we can't go up, bring them up and go, thank you for these gifts, but I want you to know it's critical, those who specifically have this ministry, and thank you for sustaining us. One little piece of good news on Project Refresh. This is a major piece of good news, hot off the press. So thanks to our intrepid chairman of the EGB. By day, he's chairman of the EGB. By night, he is fixer of all things Rosebank. Roy knows every crack on this roof. He's been up there so often. So when we did the town hall meeting, a big cost was the air unit, which is a major concern of mine personally. And the dip in winter, I understand, man. It was 7 degrees in here in the middle of winter. And so we had got estimates on what it took, and had some experts come and tell us what to do, and they quoted us 1.6 million. That's what we gave to you. But Roy, through his connections and through getting for free a professional evaluation, recently a major consulting firm, to quote us, and actually after some work and a few things, they have now just this week quoted us to fix the whole system for 55,000 rand. So Roy has saved us R1 million already. Your check is in the afterlife. So we've already, this is for me huge, because honestly I've been really concerned about that. And now we can check that off the list, get these guys to do it, and it's done. And it's reduced a huge amount of what we've been able to do. And I know as we get to each other module and we think about how we can be more money-wise about each thing, we're going to see more and more about this. So one last thing about Project Refresh, and one thing that I have zero regrets on, is our awesome new logo as a church. I don't feel like we've celebrated this enough, but just want to put that out there. Awesome new logo as a church. Maybe we'll come back to that next year. On to next few matters. So the most difficult decision that we made this year as a leadership team is the closing of the counseling center. Now, we had an information session for this about a month ago where we spent more than a few hours with interested people explaining, going into detail with the model and the reasons and answering a lot of questions. And just want to say, if there are still people who are interested in that, we have a document that summarizes the approach, so please just email me. But what I want to do tonight is just a snapshot. I mean, everything I'm doing tonight is a snapshot, but I really want to make the heart of this change clear in your minds. The new counseling model that we'll be pursuing next year, at its heart, is a scalable lay counseling model that intentionally and very openly aims to lead people into a discipleship relationship with Jesus Christ, which means, again, openly and intentionally fully integrating them into the overall ministries of the church. And this is something we believe is ultimately our particular calling as a church and responsibility as a church. And this is just heads up, this is an important reality for all churches and things leaders of churches have to think through, is there are many good things any church could do, but what churches must do, the most important thing they must do, are the things aimed at specifically and openly introducing people to Jesus. And at the heart of our counseling teams, this is something we just really believe firmly in. A person's full change involves integration into, being led into a discipling relationship with Jesus, which includes integration into the discipleship of the church, which is something that's not possible to the extent that we'd like with the current structure that we have. Now, that's a tiny summary of work done by a particular elder. We call it task force. Our elders is broken up into various teams of people looking at various issues. And so an elder task force started looking at this already in October last year, October, November, December, January, February, March, April. In May then we were, meeting with our current counseling staff, June, and in July had to make this really difficult decisions. That's a tiny summary of what this team has done, including research, academic research, connecting with other churches who have similar ministries or have had similar ministries and have done similar things, and connecting with biblical Christian counseling associations who have the same mission and vision. And so I think it's just important again to acknowledge that any change on this scale is difficult, particularly when you have affected people, that is staff members in the equation. And just believe me, we wouldn't go through the heartache of this unless we truly believed that the end goal of the ministry is something that better reflects what we believe the Bible says about discipleship, and within that one-on-one counseling relationships, and what we feel called to do as a church. We want you to know that it is, at this time, we're doing our best to care for affected staff members. We're going to celebrate some of what God has done in that sense a little bit later. But if you have concerns in this regard, or you have concerns and you want to find out how staff members are affected, please feel free to still contact me or even David Lathwaite, who's our HR committee chairperson and was on the task force as well. Or if you want to help them in it, please feel free to contact me. In the meantime, in January next year, just look out for when we bring gospel culture to bear in terms of how we equip members to care for one another at various levels and leading to this scalable lay counseling approach. All right, I'm almost done. So just 2 more topics to go. So on the subject of sensitive issues, I think it's important we talk about at this kind of meeting, the subject of diversity. So you know that for us, this is important to us, for many reasons, but firstly, missional reasons, like we really want to impact Joburg and feel like anyone who lives within Joburg should feel comfortable coming here, and so that means increasing in our diversity. So for missional purposes, and because we believe it's an inevitable consequence of the gospel, we always want to be pursuing that. So that's a big aim for us. You might remember that at last year's BGM, I acknowledged that we'd fallen behind in terms of progress on this, particularly when it came to electing of elders. What you need to know, these again are things you wouldn't know, and that's why I want to tell you, is we do have a subcommittee or task force of elders looking into kind of increasing and enhancing diversity in our church, of which Kerry Sinclair is our chairperson and has done a great job this year in really resurrecting this discussion. And I just want you to note that this is quite an important change. We've had diversity working groups in the past that have done great work, but they've been outside of the engine room of the church that is the elder structure. And so now it's housed very much within the elders. And one of the things that Kerry did is kind of ask for some stats on our diversity, but within volunteer teams. All our ministry teams at the church, which at least in the time I've been here, I'd never really looked at. And so I want to show those stats to you. So if you bring that up on the screen, so you can just kind of have a look at that. And basically what you can see is that sort of overall, our diversity numbers is 20% for volunteer teams, and the staff is about double that number, which is encouraging. The reason I mentioned this last year, though, the reason it came up, is because at the elder level, we had taken some steps backwards, but took great people on board as elders, of which Kerry is one of them. But this year, we've been a lot more intentional in trying to identify, equip, and recruit future elders who can better represent the diversity of our great city. And while not all of them were able to come on board this year, we are happy to recommend Innocent to you. We'll get to that in a moment. But what you'll hear at the end tonight when we do bid farewell to some of our officers is that at least on an elder level, that diversity number next year, would change from 21% to 33%. So that's not 10 steps forward, but it's at least progress in some way. Now, I can anticipate and would imagine that there might be questions for some of you regarding diversity. I mean, I would hope on a lot of those levels, which is things we're really thinking about, but on an EGB level, which I can appreciate. And I think all I want to say here is just correct what might be a perception error in general when it comes to our new structure. So this is still pretty new. And as I've engaged with people, I've realized there is a perception level here, which I want to take some time to maybe just clarify. It's almost like there's this idea that the EGB is kind of the primary leadership vehicle of the church, has ultimate authority. So in some people's minds, there's EGB, and then there's elders, and then there's pastors, or maybe it's pastors, elders. But either way, there's this perception that the EGB is this ultimate leadership or authority vehicle in the church, which is not true. And if you have a look at that, if you could put up that governance slide, so this is something we take new members through every time. This was part of our change to the new system, is that really we have one primary, that's that big pink group there, which is our eldership body of the church. That's our primary leadership body, of which all pastors are also elders. And we have subsets of elders, like for diversity and new members and current issues, etc. And then we have EGB as well. Now, I'm not saying that the EGB itself is insignificant, because of course, in the rules, it does have a lot of governance responsibility, and ultimately, the staff are accountable to the EGB, and that is significant. So if anyone ever wonders, who am I accountable to, or who do I report to, it's the EGB. Right? But the EGB itself is accountable to the elders, who themselves are accountable to the members of this church. And I'm not sure if you know how that works, but that's how it works. And it's quite a beautiful system. Let's just play it back the other way. That's why members of the church elect elders. And so we'll do that tonight. You were able to nominate anybody, as long as they've been a member for 2 years, to be an elder. So members can elect elders, but elders elect their EGB representative. You as members only ratify that. So just members elect elders, elders elect EGB. EGB largely are responsible for staff appointments and changes, except for the appointment of pastors. And so there's that's how it works. It's this beautiful backwards and forwards system, where on the one hand, there is governance, but on the other hand, really, it is the members of the church. So members elect elders, elders elect EGB, EGB handles staff appointments, staff are accountable to EGB, EGB to elders, elders to members. Does that make sense? And that's how it's a beautiful structure. It's not flawless, but as Roy and I were talking about recently, I mean, there is no flawless structure apart from the imminent return of the universal kingdom of Christ on earth. It just isn't. But this is an amazing system for us. And all of that to say, my focus and our focus, I think rightly now we've been pointed in our sort of lay leadership teams, but for me, certainly at elder level, to see change there, which will naturally also affect at EGB level. And my word to those of you who are concerned about this, which is most of you, help us identify, recruit, and equip and ensure people succeed at all of the levels of ministry in the church. That's what's really going to catalyze change. I mean, if you think about it, we have, and maybe you've noticed this, but growing diversity in our Sunday services, growing diversity in our new members class, growing diversity even in our baptism services. But the only way that will translate really into ultimate leadership change is if it filters through all of the volunteer teams, and we need your help with that. And so, lastly, I think speaking of leaders and into the new year, we do have some staff changes in the mix that I want to point out for you for next year. Again, I'm not sure when else we'd have the opportunity to do this. And so first, I want to mention to you that Jenny Curtin, who is our Intrepid Global Missions Director, currently works part-time or half-time. I don't think people know that because really she does a lot more than that, but that officially is part-time. Well, that's from next year. She is full-time staff here, adding a local missions component to global missions. And if you know Jenny, she's passionate, she's organized, and she can move mountains. And so we're really excited to see what she's going to do in that capacity next year. Secondly, just to highlight for you, Pastor Ndaba, again, you would never believe this, but theoretically reaches retirement age next year. You would never say that, but we have no intention of letting him go that quickly and have ensured that he'll be on our pastoral team for at least another 3 years, which is the maximum we can do at this time, and I'm really happy about that. And thirdly, though, we do next year start to say farewell to our operations manager, Shelley Seiler. So Shelley will officially be retiring in 2024, but will start to hand over some of her vast portfolio, half of it, to our new incoming operations manager over the course of next year. I mean, if you don't know this, so there's, you all know Shelley, but she's been working at Rosebank Union Church for 21 years. And if you add to that the years she worked at Rosebank Bible College, that goes up to 26 years. I'm really sad Shelley couldn't be here in person tonight, but I know she's listening online. And it's impossible to sum up the effect that Shelley has had on this church, and I can only say personally in my life since coming to Rosebank, and the impact she has on our staff and the operations of our church. And because of those years of knowledge and wisdom and maternal care, there's no way we could just hand over from Shelley to somebody, hence this kind of long-phased handover period for a year, and next year to our new operations manager. So Shelley will still very much be around, taking on half of her current responsibilities. She works, by the way, we kind of give her the freedom to work a day a week at Johannesburg Bible College, so she'll be carrying on doing that, and she'll be training her successor as well next year. And on that note, we're happy to announce that Shelley's successor next year is Razan Cloak. So, round of applause. I wish she could be here as well for that. You probably know Razan, although you might not, but she's been on staff at Rosebank in an admin capacity, so very much in the background, which is why you may not have seen her, for 8 years. So 8 years she's been on staff here as a church and been a member at our church for over 15 years. She's been so central to a lot of the administrative and operational aspects of our church over these years, and we're so confident in her appointment and excited for her future here and for ours. There's a couple of other changes. We welcome Farai from the Counseling Center into a ministries administrator position at the church. Nomalanga has a change in portfolio away from kids into a more pastorally orientated administration position. And we welcome into our next gen team for next year 3 awesome interns who will be working with Brett in a brand new intern structure, which we're very excited about. So I've said a lot. I've taken a lot more time than I was supposed to tonight, but a lot has happened this year. And I want to say just that I am super proud of our staff, how hard they've worked this year, super proud of our amazing volunteers and ministry team, for all the people that have served this year, and very thankful to this church for your support. I think we're in a great position as a church. There's lots of work still to do, but we look very much forward. I look very much forward to another year of consolidating and building with you all. That's all from my side. I'm going to hand over to Bruce, who's going to come and share the details with you on our finances.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Richard. You leave me with the envious task of trying to follow you, which is not always that easy. Can I just have the first slide up, just to give you an idea of the kind of agenda that we're going to go through, very much the same as we did last year as well. And that is, we're just going to look at the 2022 forecast results. Then we'll have a look at the 2023 budget, present that. look at some capital expenditure, and then there'll be a vote on the 2023 budget. All right, so if we can move then on to the 2022 forecast results. If I can put that chart up, the next one. Now, I understand I get complaints every year that the people at the back there can't see that. So my answer to you is you should have brought your binoculars, or if you want to come and sit here, then you can see it, that's also fine. But we have tried to make the figures a bit bigger, so hopefully, or put the background slightly differently, so hopefully you'll be able to see that. So what you've got there is two columns. The first column on the right is the 2021 actual results. And you'll recall, not that I have to remind you, but we were still under COVID in that point in time. So some of the expenses, obviously in 2021, were lower than we could have expected. And 2022, as Richard alluded to, is the first year, the full year's trading, if you want to call it that, in terms of the results. So what these results, the forecast results are, we've taken the actual results to October, and we've sort of estimated the income and expenses through to the end of December to get these figures. Just a couple of points. I mean, you can see that our offerings from 2021 is down about 1.2 million, or if you like, 5.5%. That does, we are hoping anyway, that we'll get some reasonable collections or offerings in the final 2 months of this year. Our personnel costs, our total costs, our expenses before CapEx, you can see last year was 21.5 and this year 23.1. You might ask why there's a bit of an increase. Again, I allude to the fact that some of the costs were depressed in 2021. The actual results, the budgeted costs before CapEx, are in fact about 98% of budget. So we've managed to put a lid on and contain our expenses throughout the year, and that's been a primary focus of what we do at FinCom. I think that Richard did allude to the fact that we had a fairly poor start to the 2022 year. And it's interesting, I was just pulling out some figures. Other than the actual income that we get from the renting of the facilities, every single month this year, other than October, the church has shown a deficit. So our expenses have exceeded the income. So obviously that's a concern, and again, we're going to come back to the fact that we want to try and equalize that and ensure that our expenses equal our offerings. We do analyze quite a lot at our FinCom meetings, do analysis of the giving. And what is encouraging, and I think I said this at the last meeting that I spoke at, is we look at giving units. So, if I put money in as offering, there's one giving unit. The fact that it represents myself and my wife is irrelevant. But our giving units at the beginning of the year was around 330, 340 per month. That's slowly kind of increased, and we're kind of hitting the 400 level at the moment, which is really encouraging. It means there's 50 or 60 odd people are giving their tithes and offerings to the church. And I'm going to come back to that a little bit later on. So if I turn now to the 2023, and if I can just get that next slide up, or next two, the budget assumptions. So before I show you the figures, I think it's important that you realize the assumptions that we've made in getting to those figures. So I'll just go through these quite quickly. So our salaries, we've recommended that staff, and I don't think staff actually know this because FinCom actually only approved it on Monday, we're recommending a 6% increase to staff salaries. You will recall that they got no increase at the beginning of 2021, and the increase in 2021 was in about June, and that was 3%. So you know what inflation is at the moment. It's running at, 7.5%. We think that 6% is probably what we can afford at the moment. I know Richard's gone through some of the changes in the staff structure. Our head count has gone up, we know that, but our full-time equivalents effective come down because there's some part-time students and the interns obviously are not necessarily full-time. So we've managed to push down our full-time equivalents, and overall you'll see just now that our salary budget actually only goes up by 3%, but I'll get to that now. So our missions, which is basically our missionaries, and typically we've always said that whatever remuneration increases our staff get, the missionaries follow, so they will get a 6% increase as well. And then our mission general expenses, it's not a big figure, but those will just be increased nominally as well. Outreach, we've spoken, Richard spoke quite extensively about campus outreach in JBC, the Alex College. The campus outreach, we put 400,000 in, but there's been money that was received in the past, so that comes down to 280 odd, so that's in the budget. But JBC is the one area of the budget that we really are not 100% sure of. So if you look at the JBC, the total budget for the Alex Bible College, it's about 1.5 million. We've got secured about 300, which brings us down to 1.2 million. Essentially, we as a church are the banker of last resort of Alex. We do have patrons that support particular students, and there's also other churches that have also put money in, and Nat also gets some money from wherever, overseas and so on and so forth. So what do we put in the budget? Do I go for the full 1.2? It's unlikely that we're going to incur that, but we have to put something in. So what we put in the budget is a 300,000 Rand allocation. Suffice to say that when you look at the 2022 results this year, JBC as college hasn't cost the church anything in terms of finance. Okay, there's people time and so on and so forth. So there's been no cost to that, and we hope that we'll be able to get patron support, other support churches and so on and so forth to continue to contribute, and that we won't need to use that 300,000, but we have to put something in the budget. Okay. So the next thing on the budget, on the expense line, is the ministries. So 2022 represents a full year's costs. We haven't had a holiday club at all in the last couple of years for obvious reasons, and so we're planning to restart that in 2023. So that's really good news, I think. The earlier you get children involved in church ministry, the better. Administration, there's specific increases where necessary. There's some of the kind of costs that we have in there. We look at those. Campus costs are mainly security and utilities and maintenance costs. So the utilities is another issue where we don't really know how much to provide for. You will recall about, a month, 6 weeks ago, I can't remember now, we were on stage 6 load shedding. And the church here had 10 hours without electricity. That cost us 4,500 Rand in diesel to get the generator to keep us going. So that's the trouble. We don't really know how much that's going to cost, but we put a budget in for that anyway. In the budget, we've got no project refresh expenses, and I'll come to that a bit later on. The only costs in there are related to the computers, computer rotation, and some IT costs. Okay. So the next thing is the income from the use of church facilities, and that has saved us this year. I said we ran at a church deficit, but we think, well, not think, but we estimate that the profit we're going to get from the rental of or the use of the church facilities is going to be about 1.5 million for this year, 2022, which has really been quite a godsend. But as Richard mentioned, what we're trying to achieve is to use that income for the project refresh, if we can balance, as it were, the operating costs with our the offerings that we give. So those are really the budget assumptions. So moving on then to the actual budget itself and the figures. You can see there, I've got the 2021 actual figures. This is just the costs, by the way. All right, and 2022 forecast, and then the 2023 budget. And then the percentages are up on the screen there. You'll see the personnel costs. I alluded to the fact we're going to go about 3% up. I just need to make a comment about that because you're probably going to look at the missions and say, why has that gone up 16% when we're only giving it 6%? So there is one of our staff members at the counselling division that's accepted a pastoral role at another organization, and we've agreed to support that organization until that person can get things up and running and can be self-supporting. So that's not really a staff cost, it's a mission cost because we're actually helping that organization from a mission perspective. So that person's costs have actually dropped down as we're into the missionary line. So if I add the two together, personnel and missions, and I work out the increase over the forecast for 2022, it's about a 5.2% increase. Okay, so it's not, if I average out the 3 and the 16, you get to 5.2, which I think is really, really quite commendable. So outreach, I've mentioned to you that 580 is 300,000 for JBC and 280 for campus outreach. It's interesting, I look at those figures, and the smallest expense item on the budget here is in fact outreach. I don't know what you think, but I have a feeling that those two outreach that we are having in campus outreach and JBC, because it's perhaps targeting the young adults, that could have an impact. That could plant seeds that will only come to fruit, or may not be earlier than that, but the seeds could produce fruit that lasts for 80, 90, 100 years. It is really a significant part of our ministry, and I don't want to underplay that by saying it's the smallest part of the budget. It's probably, from a long-term perspective, probably one of the most significant things. That's not to say that Rays of Hope is unimportant, but just in terms of those. Rays of Hope, thankfully, is self-supporting at the moment, and there's no actual financial support coming from the church. So ministries, I said, the costs are much the same as 2022, bit of an increase because we're going to have the holiday club and so on. Admin, I've spoken about, 5% increase is definitely reasonable in terms of where we're at now. Campus, 7.5% up, and of course the question mark there is around the load shedding costs. So I'm going to break it off here, perhaps slightly earlier, and I'm going to ask, I know the next slide will say, are there any questions? Because I'd like to get almost approval, not an approval, but I want to know that you accept what we've got here as a budget before we turn to the income side, because it's very important. I want your commitment that those costs are reasonable and that you then feel committed to actually providing the income that we need. So can I just ask, can we do that? Can we do some questions? Are there any questions? I know the online people takes a few seconds to come up, but are there questions that there might be around the hall? No? That's a relief. No questions from online yet. Okay, so I take it as read, therefore, that in a sense you kind of half approving this. I know that you've got to vote on it, but you can do that just now. All right. So can we then move to the income side? Because at the end of the day, we can't budget for income. We can only budget for expenses. We're very, very much reliant on the tithes and the offerings and the generosity of the people in the church itself. So you'll see there that what we're looking for, if I'm going to balance the budget, I feel like the Minister of Finance here. If I'm going to balance the budget, if I'm going to provide for the costs of close on 25 million, 24.7 million, including the capex costs, all right, we need to get that income in, which is basically 2 million a month. And to do that, we're going to have to up our givings from giving by that 19%. Now, I think there's two ways that we can do that. It is encouraging, as Richard said, that we've got new members coming in. So if we can increase those giving units that I spoke about, if that 400 becomes 450 or becomes 500, that has a massive impact in terms of the top line here, in terms of the total tithes and offerings that come in. And the other thing is, I would really request members to prayerfully think about what they give to the church, and to the extent that they can and are able to, then please consider increasing your giving to the church. So we'll always, whenever we're going to present a budget here, we're always going to have a small surplus or deficit. You can see that we're budgeting for a small deficit of 67,000, but we're reliant on the members really to step up, as it were, to the plate and to make certain we meet those expenses. So I've alluded to some of these, but just to say that our 4 key challenges for 2023 are basically our regular base income. So we do the analysis, there's some one-off large amounts that come in, which are very, very welcome. But typically what we look at as well is our base income, the regular people that give whatever amounts. Some of them can be 1,000, some of them can be 10,000 or 30,000, whatever the case might be. But if we can get that regular base income up from the present approximately 1.6 million a month to about 1.8 million, then we can rely on the one-offs to give us the balance to take us up to the 24 million. Right, so that's the challenge. The challenge also, and I've spoken about this, I'm not going to say it again, about the budget for The Alexandra campus, is 300,000 enough? I don't know, but I'll rely on you guys to come to the party as far as that's concerned. The ministry costs have been contained. I think there is, certainly in my mind, and I think Roy and I have spoken about this, is are the church activities being hampered through lack of funds? And if it is, then that's a worry. So, there's not a lot of places you can start to cut if your income doesn't come in. Obviously, ministry costs is one of those areas, and obviously personnel and missions as well. And then the campus costs, again, who knows what those costs are going to be with load shedding as we are at the moment. Okay, so the last item on my agenda before we go to vote is around the 2023 capital expenditure. So, as we've said all along, Project Refresh is not in the budget, and that will only progress when we get specific donations for it. And I would encourage you, please, while we would want donations for Project Refresh, what's more important is to cover operating expenses. So I don't think people have, but to the extent that people have dropped their offering for the operational expenses to give to Project Refresh, just please, I'd ask you perhaps just to reconsider that. Okay, and then, so any surplus from the facilities, which is not required to cover that operating costs, will obviously also go into Project Refresh in terms of the costs there. And then I mentioned about the CapEx, it's really computer rotation and IT costs. So I think before I go to questions, if there are any more, I really do want to say thank you to FinCom members. I know there's two Richards, non-staff Richards that are on there, Roy and Helen and Johan, and then the staff members that so regularly attend, Moira, Shelley, Sandy, and Richard makes a guest appearance every now and again. But yeah, thank you. I mean, it's really a great group to work with. Attendance at FinComs are excellent. You don't have many people, but don't have anyone really not attending. And I think that there's some really good discussions that are had. There's no holy cows in it, and people challenge each other in the process. So thank you to FinCom. So what I'd like to do is to go to questions about the overall budget. You've had your grants on expenses, but I'm happy to take those if need be. Oh, sorry, there's a question there. I think you want the mic? Thanks.
Thank you. My question is on the income side. We spoke about maybe 1.5 million income for rental of the facilities. Is that in the top line or the other income?
No, it's not there at all.
It's not there
Not there at all.
So you don't reflect it there, and it's because if it comes in, it pays for refresh.
No.
No.
If the operating expenses are covered by normal offerings,
Balance, yeah.
then the rental from facilities will go to Project Refresh.
All right.
Okay. Is that clear? Yeah. So I didn't want to muddle that here by putting that in and then having to explain. So what you see there is really just the operational expenses need to be met by that income, and then any surplus from facilities use will deploy.
So in a sense, it's almost like a safety net as well.
It is.
Yeah.
It's been our safety net this year.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Any other questions? All right, so just really, sorry, is there a question? No, there's nothing come up. Yeah. Is there one more question there? Sorry, yes.
Yeah, just a question. Does FinCom have a strategy if the income doesn't come in the first quarter? And how would you look at cutting back expenses? Or are you going to subsidize it just straight through the facilities rental?
Yeah, so Dave, that is a good question. I mean, we have got some cash in the bank, which will carry us, for a couple of months. Ultimately, though, we could be faced with an April 2020, or not April 2020, February, March 21, where we looked very carefully at, or not carefully, but we actually announced that we were going to cut salaries. So that's our single biggest expense. I mean, you can look at that there. It's 40 million out of 24. And that's not obviously a route that we would take lightly and or we'd want to go. There is an element, as I think I've said before, in FinCom you sit with an element of faith, but you also have to have sort of practical conservatism involved as well. So yeah, that's the budget, and we just got to pray and hope and stand in faith that God will provide for those needs. But yeah, the main area of cutting would always be remuneration, personnel costs. Is that okay, Dave?
Yeah, thanks. I think you've answered the question. I do think that 19% income increase in the current economic climate is a little high compared to what most people are taking strain on, as part of living. Most people are picking up increased fuel costs, increased food costs. 1.9%, I think, is the latest projection by the GDP growth.
GDP figures, yeah.
Semigration, immigration, etc., etc. So I would consider that, or just ask that FinCom really assess the expenses budget. I don't see massive positive, and I'm not negating that God can give us anything. God can. And I certainly, in the years of my being council chair, we saw God come through quite a few times. Yeah. But you do have to do prudent budgeting. Yeah. So just my personal comment, I do think your income number is quite high.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. I think if anyone looked at the website in terms of the budget that was put up there, you'll see there that we said that we are very, very aware of the economic situation. We're not oblivious to that, and we understand that 19% is a tough ask. Hence, I'm saying if we can increase the giving units, and if new members are coming in, hopefully that'll get balanced. All right. I don't think our expenditure budget is in any way out of kilter with the past. In fact, if you go back to even 2018, 2019, we're still sitting on the same income that we had then. So we need to put it to the church and say, these are the issues that are in front of us. And hopefully, if every person increases their giving by even a few percent, it can have a big impact at the end. Any other questions? Were you able to see the figures up there?
Yes, I was. I just have a question.
Sure.
I remember a Monday webinar I think in 2020, where I don't remember his name. It was a pastor, and he was having a financial discussion about how ministries and churches can weather, unforeseen events, like, for example, COVID. And he was talking about in his church how he had a 6-month discretionary fund, and how he was encouraging our church to think about a emergency fund. I'm bringing this up because it really impressed me that it's something we look at personal finance type of thing, but looking at it as a church it's an amazing webinar. I was wondering if the FinCom had. We may not be able to afford it right now, but whether in the future we can think about starting an emergency fund.
No, thank you for that comment. I think that's. I think back in 2019 and around about then, we wanted to start implementing a case where we start building up our what is it called? Capital fund. What do we call it? Capital Development Fund. And we were, at that stage, going to put 1% away of all offerings into the Capital Development Fund to cover things like what we now term Project Refresh. I think it's fair to say, though, that one of the areas that we look at very closely at FinCom is our cash flows and our closing cash balances every month, and we monitor that quite carefully. And God has provided, through the hospitality and obviously there's income that's coming from Project Refresh, which is sitting there. Not that we want to dip into that, but obviously, if we have to do that, borrow from it, then we would have to do so from a cash perspective, not from a fund perspective. All right, thanks. I mean, I think that's a good thing we can consider. All right. Okay, any other questions? I think just really for me to conclude is just to really say thank you that our needs for 2022 have been met. We're grateful for that. We trust God to meet our needs for 2023. We pray for the finances of the church members, because obviously if the church members succeed on a financial side, then one hopes that it has a ripple effect into the church. So we do pray for them as well, and we continue to pray for wisdom and for good stewardship of not only FinCom, but elders and EGB and so on and so forth. So what you're going to do now is you're going to vote. So if you take that little piece of paper, the QR, as we were informed, and then vote for that. Vote number one, yeah. Can I sit down?
Okay, so if you could just access your, either if you read it by paper, then it's a simple cross next to the yes or no. If it's on the QR code, quick response code, then just aim your phone at vote number one, please. Jaime is up in the control room. He's just managing this thing. We've used another way of doing it. Sorry? Yeah. He's going to be managing the votes. Does anybody need a manual voting paper? Right. So can we just get... Sebastian, thank you very much. Okay. If anybody's having trouble with that, just raise your hand. We can just see if we can fix those problems. But other than that, hopefully you should be voting all right. And on that note, I'd better vote as well. There is a budget acceptance paper. If you need one, Sebastian's probably running around like crazy looking for it. It was downstairs on the table. It's on. Yeah, once you voted, just escape from all the commercial notices from Typeform, please. Just to clarify the position, Gareth is the church secretary and will be collecting the votes and obtaining the information from John as well online. So he'll manage that voting process. The voting for the approval of the budget is a simple majority of people that have voted. Okay. Any outstanding issues on voting? Anybody still need to sort that out? Can we move on? Thanks. Right, we've got two other matters to vote on this evening. The first one is the election of Innocent Musonda as an elder for Rosebank Union Church from effective immediately, but it kicks in effectively from the new year as an elder. So just to clarify, Innocent was part of the elder onboarding program that was taking place in 2021. He's now in a position to be able to take up the position as an elder. So we've received his nomination form. The nominations committee has interviewed him and is recommended him for appointment as an elder. As members, you, as Richard explained earlier, you choose your elders. So the members need to now vote on that. Details of his CV and whatever were put up on the website, so presumably or hopefully you would have seen that. And I propose that we just go straight to the vote. Does anybody need a paper vote for the Innocent Musonda's approval, yes or no? Right, so if you can do that. If you can do that now, appreciate it. While you're in that same form, I'm going to move straight to the third election. So just to be clear how this works, as Richard explained, the elders, out of the elder body, the elders select and nominate people for the EGB. We have one person who's retiring this evening, and we'll come to that later. That's Gareth. So there was one position available for the EGB. And the elders have nominated Raymond Sinclair to take that position. So what this requires members to do, because again it's an approval process from the members need to vote for that, and it's a 2/3 majority requirement for the appointment of Raymond to the EGB in place of Gareth, who's retiring at the end of this year. So if you can move to that vote as well. And then we're on the home straight.
Mr. Chairman, may I announce that the vote has been 100% in favour of the budget being passed.
Thank you very much. Right, so that's easy now. All we've got to do is get the money from you. By the way, I had a little devious thought today when we handed out these QR codes. I thought maybe we should do a substitute snap scan here. And when you were voting, we would actually just drain your account at the same time. Sort out, refresh, the budget, and JBC all in one go. But fortunately, we're not going to do that, so don't panic. Don't worry, it's not a scam. It's a normal vote. Okay, have we got the votes done for the election of elder and for the election of EGB member? Because we want Gareth to have 2 last jobs to do before he retires. Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Sebastian, for collecting the votes. Okay, anybody still sitting with a voting paper that they want to hand in, need to hand in? There's some people up at the top there. Right, you'll notice if you've been following your agenda carefully that we are on item number 5, which is retiring officers. It sounds like a military training camp here. But just to confirm that we have to say farewell, or we're saying farewell to 3 of our elders this year. The first person is James Wetton. So James is an elder of the church, right, who was elected when we put the new structure in place in 2020. So he's been an elder for the last 2 years. James also is a part of our counselling team and has been doing work there, and he's also been very heavily involved in obviously Rosehaven and Park Care and involved in our seniors ministry, over 60, right? So if Brett operates at the beginning of the cycle, when members are young, James works at the other end of the spectrum, right? And you would have no doubt known him, or been around for a number of years. He got married recently. He's been doing a great job. And the very exciting news is that James has been invited to be a pastor at Kingsmead Christian Fellowship. And for people that don't know what Kingsmead Christian Fellowship, that is actually the church in Rosebank. We're Rosebank, but we're not actually in Rosebank, and they're in Rosebank, but they're not called Rosebank. But don't worry, it's complicated. But the point is that he's joining Kingsmead Christian Fellowship next year as a pastor in the care ministry there. And so we're really excited because this has been something that he's been looking forward to doing, to picking up a pastoral role for some time. And we're very pleased that he's been approached in that sense. To assist in making sure that this happens, obviously, Bruce would have given you some information on it. The church is going to be supporting him, supporting Kingsmead Christian Fellowship in terms of our kingdom-mindedness approach to the ministry through the course of next year on a phased approach. So obviously, there's a process which we're supporting them financially, just so that James can get into position there and be involved as a care pastor in that church. So, James, we really wish you all the very best. We thank you for your service at Rosebank and for your. You're never going to even. I mean, I think God's going to have a long day that day when He starts handing out rewards, because He's got to remember all the funerals, all the visits, all the care that James provided to people that goes unnoticed and unmentioned. So thank you very much. And James is easy. If you look in your Bible, you'll see there's a book called James. So when you see that, remember to pray for James, right, next year. Keep him in your prayers. We really want to see his ministry continue to flourish, and we thank him for his service as an elder at Rosebank. Can we give him a round of applause? The next person that I want to mention is Sylvia Jones. Sylvia Jones has actually worked on the council, has been a member of the council and now elders, but we followed that process through. So she's completed 2 terms of 3 years each, so that is 6 years. And in terms of our rules and our transition rules, if you'd served periods prior to the new structure when you came in the end of 2020, you retained that time frame. So she had done 4 years, she's done another 2 years now, so now we give her a holiday, right? A sabbatical. Okay, and that's meant for time for refreshing. There's no such thing as retirement in the Bible. I haven't found it yet. Nobody's giving up on getting out of work forever. But from a leadership perspective, we want obviously rotation and fresh eyes to come in. So Sylvia will be taking a sabbatical next year. Sylvia's been really working hard. I mean, she was part of the diversity workforce workshop. She was part of the call committee, which, as you know, went on for quite a while before we found Professor Daniel. And then also, she was also part of... it's not his second name, by the way. And then also, Sylvia was involved this year in the counselling ministry, and so we thank her for that. The counselling task force, the work's done, and she specialises in research, and she's been great at that. She's done our minutes for the elders. So Sylvia, really going to wish you all the best in your year, your sabbatical year. We know that God's got good plans for you, and we are going to still expect to see you back at some stage, but she said to me, I can talk to you in a year's time, so watch the space. Okay, so again, thank you, Sylvia. And then the last person I need to call on or talk to is talk about is Gareth. So I think maybe what I should do is ask Gareth and Isabel to come up here. Gareth's got to come up here anyway to tell us what the voting results are if he's got them. Well, the fact that he's sitting down tells me that he has got the results. So perhaps if you could come forward, Isabel. So just to let you know, while he's coming forward, Gareth has been involved with Rosebank Union Church for 53 years. So that's when I was in grade 1, and that was a long time ago, right? A long time ago. Gareth was here. Gareth was doing things. Gareth was sorting out stuff. Gareth was managing finances, changing the rules, getting the structures right, overseeing the building. He's responsible for looking after the finances while we moved to Hurlingham, from Rosebank, should I say. And I mean, I don't know. I mean, if we had to actually list all his accomplishments, I don't think we'd be going home tonight. Gareth and Isabel have relocated to Howick. They used to be in Craigtown, a few minutes away. Now it takes Gareth about 8 hours to get to a meeting because he's got to drive from Howick. So he's officially coming up for retirement, and words cannot express the amount of appreciation that we have for his efforts over the years. And obviously, Isabel as that just faithful person supporting him in every situation. So thank you, both of you. We really appreciate your commitment and work at Rosebank. And we know that you're now going to officially start looking for another church, maybe, in Howick, right? But, we are online, of course, right? So you don't have to stop watching us. And secondly, just all the very best in your official retirement. Thank you. Right.
You know, I really want to say it's not about the past, it's about the future. And a lot of what I've done has been to equip the church for the future, with others, of course. And it's all about the future. And I believe that this church is poised to be a leading church in Joburg and in South Africa. We've got all of our internal structures and everything like that right. We've got the A-team in place. And this church is poised to grow. Go do it. Both resolutions were passed by the requisite majorities. Thank you.
Thanks, Gareth. Gareth goes back to Howick tomorrow, so we pray for travelling mercies for him, and we wish him all the very best. Thank you to the elders, and we congratulate Innocent on his appointment as an elder. And we congratulate Ray on his appointment into the EGB. I've got lots of jobs for him. Right, so you've heard from Richard in terms of the feedback, and I think that was very helpful for you to get an opportunity just to have some reflection of what has happened in the church, particularly this year, and how his ministry has unfolded and how we've been blessed through Richard and certainly the entire pastoral team and staff team. So I'd like to just literally close the meeting in prayer. And I've taken tonight's prayer from the Hillsong's Desert Song, written by Brooke Lidgett, because I felt that it actually encapsulated quite a number of the areas that we've actually spoken about, that Richard's spoken about in Daniel, about our struggles, our present challenges and issues, but also our blessings as well. So if we can just bow our heads in prayer. Lord, we have learnt from your word how desirable prayer is to you. You have also taught us to pray. We glorify and magnify your name. May your kingdom come, and may your will be done right here in Rosebank Union Church, here in Johannesburg, in South Africa, and across the world. As we reflect on 2022, we pray as follows. This is our prayer in the desert, when all that's within us feels dry. This is our prayer in our hunger and need. Our God is the God who provides. This is our prayer in the fire, in weakness or trial or pain. There is a faith proved of more worth than gold. So refine us, O Lord, through the flame. This is our prayer in the battle, when triumph is still on its way. We are a conqueror and co-heir with Christ, so firm on his promise we'll stand. This is our prayer in the harvest, when favor and providence flow. We know we're filled to be emptied again. The seed we've received, we will sow. Thank you that you, Lord, that you are with us in the desert, the fire, the battle, and the harvest. We know that you are a faithful God. We thank you. And now may the blessings of God be with us all as we continue to live out your will in our lives. Amen. Thank you very much for your attendance this evening.